Welcome to Sports Mechanics with Mr. Morosco. We will be going over my webpage today, and I will be taking you through how to navigate my webpage, my lessons, and what else is included. Looking at the unit title is Sports Mechanics, and the content area is Physics, Motion Mechanics. This is for 11th and 12th grade. The unit summary. In this unit, students will engage in class activities that will help them understand the mechanics of sports. Together, we will identify common misconceptions about motion mechanics and develop a proper understanding of Newton's laws and mathematical representations used with motion mechanics. The first lesson will begin with a class discussion of motion within our everyday life and a detailed overview of Newton's laws of motion, along with practice problems for the students to complete. The second lesson allows students to utilize 21st century technology skills by investigating information on reliable science websites about sports mechanics. The third lesson helps students organize important motion mechanic concepts and mathematical representations with specific sport movements. At the end of the unit plan, students will be able to work collaboratively in pairs and groups to hypothesize the motion of an athlete during a sporting event by utilizing motion mechanic knowledge from the unit's lesson. Going down further to the NGSS, the standards that we will be covering will be PS2, 1 through 3. However, we'll go over those a little bit more in detail as we go through each lesson. The big idea questions. The essential idea is to utilize physics motion mechanics to analyze and apply to real-world sporting events. The essential question would be, how can physics be used to give athletes the winning advantage in a sport? The unit topics are going to cover mass, vectors, velocity, acceleration, distance, displacement, forces, and Newton's laws of motion. The unit question is going to be, how can forces influence the motion of athletes during a sporting event? The content skills will be to utilize mathematical representations to understand motion. And the content question will be, how is motion mechanics analyzed using mathematical representations that follow Newton's laws of motion? The student objectives, we have 3 for each lesson. And again, we will go over those more in detail with each lesson. Moving on to Lesson 1. Lesson 1 will consist of a teacher lecture that will increase students' knowledge about the linear motion. The goal is to increase students' knowledge about linear motion by learning about speed, velocity, acceleration, and motion graphs. The objectives will be for students to be able to describe the motion of an object by its position, speed, direction, and acceleration after reading a given word problem. They will also be able to compare and contrast velocity and acceleration using graphical analysis. And finally, we'll be able to analyze and solve linear motion problems using velocity and acceleration equations. For this lesson, we will be covering the content standard PS2-1. For this lesson, the teacher presentation and guided notes are needed. And here below you can see the embedded PowerPoint that you can move through. Moving on to Lesson 2, the Webercise. Lesson 2 will consist of a web-based learning activity that will increase students' knowledge about motion mechanics in relation to sports. The goal is to increase students' knowledge about mechanics by investigating, analyzing, and solving sport motion problems. The objectives are going to be for students to compare and contrast velocity and acceleration using text and video evidence. They will also be able to analyze and solve interactive digital motion problems by following specific motion concepts, and also will be able to create a visual model of all the motion forces involved for a specific sport action. The content standards that this lesson will cover are PS2, 1, and 2. And you can see below that the Weber size is embedded into this page, and you can go through it from here. And all the way back up to the top, we will move on to Lesson 3. Lesson 3, the Graphic Organizer or Concept Map. Lesson 3 will consist of reading Chapter 3 of the textbook on motion in 2 dimensions and creating a graphic organizer, a concept map, using a website, particularly Popplet, to increase students' knowledge about sport mechanics. The goal is to increase students' knowledge about sports mechanics by reading, comprehending, organizing, and explaining information about motion in 2 dimensions. The objectives. Students will be able to organize the relationship between vocabulary terms, equations, and examples from assigned textbook reading, Chapter 3, by creating a Popplet concept map. Students will be able to explain the mathematical equations used for solving 2-dimensional problems within the concept map. Students will also be able to apply their understanding of motion mechanics in 2 dimensions to evaluate a sport mechanic motion of their interest within the concept map. The content standards that Lesson 3 will cover are PS2, 1, 2, and 3. The concept map directions, and followed by the graphic organizer rubric. And finally, the graphic organizer sample. Instead of having a separate document that contains the concept map directions, it is instead directly on this page. The directions contain an explanation of what it is and give students a checklist to follow to complete it. Moving on to the assessments page. You can see on the assessment page my timeline and summaries of each assessment given during this unit, and I will go ahead and scroll through the summaries for you just to give you a quick overview of what type of assessments will be taking place. And moving on to resources. On my resources page are the resources for the students to utilize throughout this unit plan, including vectors, force and motion, projectile motion, Newton's laws of motion, baseball and softball mechanics, football mechanics, and finally soccer mechanics. And to our last section, the more unit plan template and teacher site. First, the unit plan template. On the unit plan template is a summary of the digital unit plan and everything that we have just viewed. Moving on to the teacher site. The teacher site link is a link to the teacher website for the students to utilize, and that includes the rest of the course information, contact information, and other pertinent details. I would like to thank you for taking your time to going through the Mr. Morosco Science website, and if you have any questions, feel free to go ahead and contact me on the contact page. Have a great day.